Hello everyone, and welcome back to my podcast, which is Fiber, Floss, and Fiction. I am Ann P, and today is Thursday, the 30th of January, 2020. Welcome back to my returning viewers and subscribers, and also a welcome to any new watchers. I hope that you find a reason to come back and visit with me. Hit the subscribe button. And generally enjoy hearing me talk about crafts and reading and a few quick life updates. So here we are, almost at the end of January, which I find very hard to believe. The year is already off to a start. I feel a little bit like I was left at the gate, I think. Not sure why that is, but at any rate, kind of getting finally settled into routine of the new year and all that good stuff. We are having some gorgeous weather. It is cool and crisp out, but we have bright sunny skies and our typical New Mexico blue, non-cloudy skies. We don't have very much cloud cover here ever, but these winter days where it's just bright sunlight and cold, crisp air feel really amazing. I am back from Madison. I went off and did my tour there, came back, and so am now kind of at home for a few weeks before gearing up to head out to Stitches West in the San Jose, San Francisco Bay Area. So that will be I believe it's the third weekend in February, up and coming. I'm going to just get right on in it today. I don't have a ton of time and I want to make sure I get through everything, but I don't think this will be a super long video. So let's go ahead and get started, and we're going to talk about knitting first. So the first thing I wanted to talk to you all about in knitting is a finished piece that I have gotten through. You've seen me working on it. This is the Heart Warmer Cowl by Letty's Knits. Justina Lorenkowska, I think is how she says her name. As always, I will put a link to any pattern that I talk about in the description box below. This is knit with one skein of my Willy Wonka Fibers Ayrton sock, which is a merino cashmere nylon fingering weight yarn. And it's this really fun sampler cowl that starts with this pretty lace pattern and then has a bunch of different types of textured stitches, these great 3D bobbles there, which were fun to knit. And I love this smocked portion here. That would look so great with a hand paint or multicolored yarn. The pattern actually calls for this as a 2-skein pattern, but I had probably 30 or so yards left of the 435 yard skein. So I would consider it a single skein project. There are places that you could cut out a repeat if you felt like you were running low on yarn. I think you could get by not doing 1 or 2 repeats here and maybe cut off a repeat of that if the yardage was a concern, or if you only had maybe 400 yards to work with. But a really fun sampler project that teaches you all kinds of different stitch patterns. And this actually is the project that I've selected for the second kit installment for the Knitter's Journey Club, which will be the April through end of July, basically, or August project that we're doing as part of a skill set building club. So we'll obviously work on lace. We're going to work on some basics like ribbing. We'll work on bobbles, slip stitch type patterns, and then some more lace. So a really fun pattern, even if you decide you're not going to be in the club. It's a great accessory and super warm and very pretty. I think it's just a nice combination of interesting stitches, and definitely one that is good to use up a single skein that you have in your stash, as well as one that isn't super boring to knit because the pattern changes so much throughout. So I really enjoyed this one, and looking forward to kind of putting that into my winter wardrobe mix. The next piece I'm going to talk about is a sweater that I'm working on. Oops, hang on, I set it on the far side of my camera. This is the Spectre pullover by Joji Locatelli. It is a yoke sweater, top down, and it's also worked as a fade sweater. So there's 4 different types of yarn that are used in that, and you blend them as you work along. Sorry, phone, it obviously picked a bad time to sit and try to do this. At any rate, this is also going to be a project for the Knitter's Journey Club, so I'm knitting the sample right now, and then I'll also probably use it to wear when I teach my yoke, top-down yoke construction class, which I teach at most of the Stitches events. So I have started, well, obviously at the top because it's top-down, with Unicorn here at the neck and onto the yoke. I have just, like within the last day, divided for the sleeves, and in doing that, I've gotten to the point for my size where you also start working the fade. So I am fading in, you can see it pretty subtly there. It's a very pale lavender, pale purple. So let me show you those 2 yarns. So this is Unicorn in the skein, and then this is Hidcote, which is the next color that I'm fading in. So working with both of those at the same time. So the yoke is worked with a ribbed and sort of trellis work type pattern, which I think you can see there with the crossed motifs. And then the rest of the sleeves and the body are just worked in a much simpler reverse stockinette rib. And what she has you do when you get to this point, because I'm obviously working it on the needles here, is you're actually knitting it from the inside out. So you're doing most of the garment construction where you're knitting the bulk of the stitches and not purling the bulk of the stitches. Unless you love to purl, in which case, you know, obviously you can just have it stay with this being the side you're working on. But per the instructions, which is what I'm knitting it as, I'm working it actually on the inside, and you can sort of see the fade process is a little more noticeable on the plain stockinette, but you can almost not really tell which rows I've switched on for that reverse stockinette, because the purl bumps tend to kind of painterly blend those colors. So I am at the point now that I'm just working round and round and round and round to do the garment body, and then I will come back and pick up the sleeves and work those down. So that is where I am on that, and I will just continue working on it until I get it finished. But enjoying that. I think her patterns are nicely written. They've got good details. They've got interesting details to them. Just a nicely done pattern. So I'm enjoying that one quite a bit. And then I decided that, because I was doing some tidying up and cleaning of things that I have like sort of a work basket that has things that I've pulled yarn for and thinking about knitting, and I was really tempted to cast on just a basic scarf or something completely mindless for those times when you need something completely mindless. And I realized that I still had an in-progress piece, which is the pattern Herald by Woolenberry. Janina Kylo, I think is how she says her name. And you might remember that I was knitting this one last year using a hand-spun yarn that's a merino and tencel blend. Here is the original hand-spun. So kind of soft greens, like tealy greens and pinks. And it's a simple lace garter stitch asymmetrical triangle shawl. So I decided I'm just gonna haul this out and work on it till it's done. It's not a hard project. It's very straightforward. It goes quickly. It's great for like TV watching, or, you know, if you're sitting waiting for like an oil change or something like that. So that'll be kind of my easygoing project that I'll work on little by little till I get it done. And no time frame or anything like that on it. Just work on as I see fit. So let's see, just for interest, if you are somebody who wants to take a class with me, I will of course be teaching at Stitches United in Hartford, Connecticut at the end of March. They do still have a few openings for one of my classes there if you have interest in taking those. And then they also, I think in the next week or two, are going to be opening the slots for Stitches Midwest, which is outside of Chicago in Schaumburg, Illinois, and that is in midsummer. I think it's the first weekend in August. So if you're interested in taking a class with me, those are two places where I will be in the upcoming months. I think all of my classes at West are sold out, so they may have a waiting list. You could contact them. I will put the link to the Stitches events below. You can always get on the waiting list because stuff comes up, people cancel, or you know, just can't come for whatever reason. So if they did have an opening, at least you'd be on the list if that was some venue that you knew you could attend and wanted to take a class with me. So I think that's about it for knitting, and so we're going to go ahead and move on to books. So a few things to talk about in books. Let's go ahead and talk about the book that I have finished to share with you guys. This is called We Live in Water by Jess Walter. Say that 3 times fast. This is a collection of short stories that are set in basically the early 90s, 1990s, in the Spokane, Washington area. Some are more urban-based, some have a few historical references to the 50s, but primarily they're about people in that area from the end of the 20th century. An interesting collection where there are some of the same characters that pop up throughout the short stories. Some of the short stories are very short. They are literally like 4 pages long. And it's not a very weighty tome. It's pretty short. It's 175 pages basically. The interesting thing that I liked about this was he has this section at the back called Statistical Abstract for My Hometown, Spokane, Washington. And in it, he's compiled some of the statistics about the Spokane area during the time where he is setting these stories, during the time period where he's setting these stories. So it's interesting to read about sort of some of the documented social trends from a completely numbers-based standpoint, and then read the stories about the people. So there is a fair amount of focus on non-intact families and addiction of one kind or another, and people who are right on the poverty line edge, either one side or the other. They're nicely written. The characters are gripping. I don't often read books that are sort of this kind of contemporary social commentary, because that's basically what this book is. The author's made a conscious choice, he mentions in that sort of epilogue, to continue living in this area, even though it is very depressed economically. And he, at least at the time this book was written, he was living like 3 blocks away from a halfway house, where sometimes he would have people wandering through his yard, either looking for the house or looking for someone who was living at the halfway house. So I think it's a really great portrait of a city in a certain time, and it certainly hits some buttons about some socioeconomic problems that we have in this country. It's not light. There's nothing like upbeat particularly about this book. A few of the characters do find redemption in the stories, but as a whole, there's a lot of bad stuff that goes on in people's lives, is the point of many of these stories. So, a good read. I'm glad I picked it up. It may or may not be to your taste, but one that I enjoyed reading and thinking about the characters and the stories in it as I worked my way through the short stories. Hang on one second. I'm kind of all over the place today. It's been that sort of week. Okay, so next I'm going to just mention briefly that I started a book called My Dear Hamilton by Stephanie Dray. It is a very rare thing that I do not finish a book. Normally, if I start a book, I see it to its bitter end, even if I'm like, about it. I had so many problems with this book, and I wanted to like it so much. It is a book told from the perspective of Eliza Schuyler Hamilton, Alexander Hamilton's wife. She was a member of the New York kind of top 4 families, like the Van Rensselaers, the Schuylers, people who were involved in politics. Her father was a general. She marries Alexander Hamilton, and this book is about her late teenage years to when she meets Hamilton, and then after they get married. This book should have been a great read for me. It's a time period I love. It's a subject matter I love. When I worked at Colonial Williamsburg, one of the things that I worked on was a group of clothing that they had gotten that was part of the trousseau of one of the Van Rensselaer women, Anne Van Rensselaer, from this time period, from like the 1780s, 1790s, that I got to catalog and spend tons of time with, and I feel very proprietary over this young woman from centuries ago, just having spent time with her, clothing that was important to her. So I really, really wanted to like this book, and I could not like this book. I think it had 4.25 out of 5-star ratings on Goodreads, and I don't know if that was maybe fueled by the fact that it came out in around the same time that Hamilton the musical was out and was kind of riding the cusp of that. But first off, if you don't know, Alexander Hamilton was killed in a duel with Aaron Burr. That's historical fact. I understand if you're not American or maybe not interested in early American history, you might not know that or have remembered that from school, but this book, basically at the end of every second or third chapter, there was like this foreshadowing where the main character, Eliza, would say, "If only I knew how things were going to turn out. If only I knew that our lives would be ruined." I don't need to be reminded of that every 25th page. I don't need that. We already know what happened. Alexander Hamilton was shot and killed in a duel with Aaron Burr. You don't need to foreshadow it. There's no surprise there. He was killed. That's the end of that. We know how it's going to turn out, right? So I felt like that was completely unnecessarily overly melodramatic. The other thing I had issues with is, while what little I know of Eliza Schuyler would seem to indicate that she was a fairly forward-thinking young woman of her time, she was a woman of her time, which is to say the late 18th century. And this author has made this young woman seem very, very 20th century to me, and I couldn't get over that. All her responses, her manner of speaking, her outlook on life, I just could not wrap my head around the fact that this was a true representation of somebody from the late 18th century. Even if they were very forward-thinking for their time, they were still a product of their time, which is to say not our time. So I've just told you a whole bunch about a book that I didn't even finish. Couldn't get through it. And unfortunately, what wound up happening is I kept feeling like, I have to finish this book. And so I didn't start anything else. I just continued to like try to read another chapter and try to read another chapter. And I finally just said, you know what? Like fresh slate, start something new that you'll enjoy and move on. You can't like spend any more time on this. It's a 600-page book. So anyway, a little stagnant on the reading this time. But I have been reading two books which I am enjoying, one of which is an audiobook I've been listening to, which I should be finished up with to talk to you about next time, called Washington Black, which is very good. Also set actually early 19th century in a very interestingly written book. More on that when I finish it, because I think something is coming in the last half hour worth of the read. So I want to make sure I can summarize the book from start to finish for you all. And the other is a book called The Dante Chamber, which I'm reading as well by Matthew Pearl, which is a historical murder slash whodunit type mystery with the poet Christina Rossetti and Robert Barrett Browning and the artist Gabriel Dante Rossetti as the three main players in the story. They're kind of, two of them are the sleuths and one of them is missing. So very good, and pushes all of my geeky literature type buttons to read about authors come to life and doing things of interest using their brains and using all their powers of deduction. So more on that when I finish it. So that's it for books this week. A little disappointing, certainly for me, I'm sure for you all, but let's go ahead and move on to cross stitch. All right, so in cross stitch, let's talk first about my finish, which is actually fully finished. We should all be impressed by that, which is the August wordplay. This is stitched on a 36 count linen from Picture This Plus, the name of which I can never remember. It's kind of a mottled brown natural color. I stitched this using a lot of the called for general arch threads, but I also supplemented some color and cotton, including this great variegated green that I used for the sunflower stems. And then I backed it with this, it looks like it has cross stitches on it, but it's actually printed on the fabric in kind of this sage green, which I thought would go really nicely with the Lexington green that I used for her dress. So just made that into a little pillow, and so that will be ready to display come August. I am closing in on, I think I have 4 or 5 of these left to finish out the year. So the beginning of the year is pretty strong. I've got January, February, March done and finished. I showed you April, my last visit video. I just got the frame that I'm going to use for that. So then I'm missing May, June, and July. I finished August. I have September finished, as is October. And then I have November and December. So kind of 2 parts of the year are done, but this one is finished and ready to be displayed, which I'm thrilled about. So love those. They're super cute and very fun projects, and my goal is to have all of them finished by the end of the year. All right, so then let's talk about what I've been working on. First up is Heaven and Earth Designs Mini Winter's Encounter, artwork by Laura Prindle. I have been working on this one for the Full Coverage Fanatics Around the World Challenge for Australia, because I tied in the theme of The Man from Snowy River, which is set in Australia, with the horse and the Western saddle. And I've used that for a couple other random challenges, but I did make really good progress on it. Now, I had started working on this, and then I had been using Pattern Keeper since the end of last year. The tablet that I was working on froze. I couldn't do anything with it. It wouldn't open the screen, nothing. It wasn't dead. It was obviously like hooking up to the internet and everything, but the screen was not functioning. And I didn't want to wait. Kim, Spartan Stitcher, helpfully said, well, let the battery run down completely. Sometimes that happens with my daughter's Kindle, and then see if you can get it to come back. So I did get it to come back, but it took 10 days to run the battery down because, of course, I was being good and keeping it fully charged so I could work with it every night. So that meant that I had to open my old version of my PDF reader, open this page, which was missing about 2,000 stitches worth of markings because those were locked in Pattern Keeper, and then try to like recreate those onto the PDF and then add to the PDF. And at some point in this process, I was far enough down the line, I was like, well, I'm just going to finish this page on the PDF version because now I've marked up another 2,800 stitches and I'm too far through the page to try to figure out what's done and not done. So anyway, we've now gone back to some parking and some other weird bits. I will get this page finished, but it probably will not happen till March. However, here is where we are with this. I have just kind of some scattered bits and pieces left to do, like one little fleck there. You can see his eye though, looking down at the chickadee and all that gorgeous mane. So I'm very happy with this. I know it will get finished in March. It'll be a bit of a slog because right now it's just, you know, I've worked on it on enough different platforms that it's a little confusing where I am. However, once I get this finished, I think I'll be at about the 30% mark for that. Since it's a mini, it's a little bit smaller. And I estimated I had 1,000, maybe 1,200 stitches left. Kim thinks I have about 500, and I'm going to go with her estimate because she's usually right about pretty much everything. So if I only have 500 stitches to do on it in March to get a page finish, that will be fantastic. I will be very happy. Okay, then I have been working on my Summer Schoolhouse 1. This is a Brenda Gervais pattern, and I've just been doing basically one thread each morning while I drink my tea in this, and not really setting a goal, except this is one of the ones on my to be finished list for this year. These are deceptively large in terms of the stitch count in them and the fact that you're stitching them 1 over 1. I think it's like 104 by 145 or something like that. I am stitching it 1 over 1. I am stitching it on 28 count Monaco, and I have all 4 of them started, but this is the one that's on my get finished this year list. So I have finished the border and I have most of the house here finished. I need to finish filling in the wooden color, I guess I'm going to call it, and the door. And then I need to do the bird and this monstrous strawberry, and then the border. And I'm doing this with some Gast and some color and cotton threads. The house itself is color and cotton in dark June, which I love. I'm not sure she makes the color anymore, but love it. So just working away at that. Like I said, not any specific, like, have to get it finished at a specific time, but I am working on it to be done at some point this year. Okay, next I started something new, which is Long Dog Samplers, the Pilgrim. So this is the mock-up of what that's going to look like when it's finished. And I had purchased the fabric for this last April when I was at McKenna's stitching retreat in Arizona at the attic, and a little bit outside my wheelhouse, if you will, for what I normally would pick for colors, but boy, am I loving it. So the fabric I'm using is a 36 count, 36 count linen, hand dyed in the colorway Butternut by Crossed Wings. And I am using a hank of Silks for You in this kind of purpley periwinkle blue color, which I had in stash. And here is what it looks like currently. This is just under, I guess this is exactly 1900 stitches. I love how the blue looks against the kind of peachy, yellowy, coppery color. Love that rabbit. I think he looks great. Yeah, just I really enjoyed working on this. It's fun. It's just watching the colors show up. I loved it. So I actually have started down at the bottom. This is the center bottom, and then there's one more page here and two more pages that way. Not sure if or when that will come out this year. I think I have it slotted in for a challenge, but that might not be until June or August even. It's sometime later this year. So not gonna focus on that. I've got too many other things that I'm trying to get done this year or make progress on. So that was enjoyable to start, but probably will not have a ton of time out and about in the short term. And then finally, for a challenge these last few days in January, I've been working on Prairie Schoolers Autumn Leaves, and I'm doing the rectangular one there. I am stitching this on a 36 count linen from Zweigart. It's their Winter Moon colorway, and I'm using 2 threads over 2 of color and cotton for that. So this is the entire height and width of the piece. It's not going to be very big, which is fine. I do love those fall colors in it. I love how the leaves have come out. So, and that funky, deranged looking squirrel. I did post this on Instagram last night and asked if folks thought I should keep the barn motif there in the center, and everyone said no. And then I had different votes, but the biggest vote was for this cute little owl to put him up in the tree next to the squirrel. So I'm gonna add the owl in there instead of the barn motif, and then I'll stitch the house and the crows down at the bottom. And this is very, very Prairie Schooler-esque. Simple colors, but I do love them in the hand-painted floss. I think that makes the wording look really cool, and have been enjoying working on that. So I'm just going to be working on this tonight and tomorrow, tonight being Thursday, tomorrow being Friday, to get me through the 30th and 31st, and then we'll talk here briefly about plans. I have a lot of big projects on tap for February, and I'm not entirely sure how that will all work with the fact that I'll be in California for almost a week out of the 29 days that exist in February. However, my plans for February include working on my Once Upon a Fairy Tale, the new full coverage piece from Heaven and Earth Designs that I started in January, at the beginning of the month. I'm going to be working on Joan Elliott's Winter Fairy. And I'm going to be working on my Chatelaine, the Desert Mandala, because I have goals on all 3 of those, and all 3 of them fit challenges as well. So those are going to probably take up the bulk of my focused stitching time while I'm at home in the month of February, and then we'll see what I have bandwidth for a travel project, or yeah, what I'm going to do that week that I'm not at home. I know I'm not going to drag any of my really big projects with me, so it's going to wind up being something small like Schoolhouse or maybe even the Autumn Leaves. We'll see. I may switch up and try to do get through one more of the word plays, maybe the May word play, just to get that done and off my plate, because I do have some progress on it, I think. Either that or July. At any rate, we'll see. Stay tuned on that. I will be back to talk to you certainly before I go to Stitches at the second, third of the month. So we'll see what I wind up deciding in between here and there. But that'll at least get you started with what I'm working on currently. So I think that's it for me today. Hopefully this wasn't super, super long. You all will know better than me. I'm trying to film a little bit more frequently, so these aren't an entire hour. Apparently I have a lot to talk about, so who knew? I think next time I will be back. It'll certainly be February, but it'll probably be sometime just before the weekend of Valentine's Day. And just as a reminder, we do have an event in the Full Coverage Fanatics group for the Valentine's Day weekend, which is called All You Need Is Love. And we're just challenging you to pick a full coverage piece that has something to do with love. Either it's a piece you love, maybe it's a piece someone you love bought you the supplies for, or that you're stitching for someone you love, or has a image in it of something you love. Anything that you can tie into love is fair game for that challenge. And of course I will put a link to the full coverage group as well as that event below. We've also got a bunch of things happening that are ongoing for the year, and the February Around the World Challenge, which is where we're going to Brazil, which should be fun. As always, if you are interested in those challenges on the Full Coverage Fanatics Facebook group, I always have an announcement post. It should be the very first one pinned at the beginning of that list, that has the ongoing yearly ones as well as the monthly one that is coming up, and the links to those events if you're interested in joining us. So that really is it for me today, friends. I hope you are all well. I hope things are good in your corner of the world and that you've had some time to yourself after all of the hubbub of the holidays. I'm looking forward to talking to you guys again in February, and so until then, take care. Be well.